So I've been doing a Best Books of the Year since 2019, and I guess that makes this the 5th annual Best Books of the Year video. A quick disclaimer before this year's list. Since I started Shakespeare Play-by-Play, my second channel, a significant chunk of my reading has become Shakespeare-specific reading, and I did not read as many books published in 2023 as I would have liked. That said, I did read enough to put together a pretty good list, so here we go. According to Goodreads, at the time of reading this, I've read 105 books in 2023. About 35 of those were published this year. I've narrowed that to a list of 5 based on my usual rubric. This is going to be a list of books that have stuck with me since reading them. They're books that I'll reference in conversation, or books that gave me a new perspective. And it seems like every year, this list includes one non-fiction book of personal essays or stories that I always compare to the essays of Montaigne. And this year will be no exception to that, because Ross Gay's book, Inciting Joy, might be my favorite book of the year, and it fits that description perfectly. The essays in this book, as the title suggests, are about cultivating joy in the world and your life. There's an essay about gardening. There's one on skateboarding. There's a great essay on cover songs, which is really just a meditation on art and the creative process generally. But the ode to pickup basketball courts is the one that has stayed with me the most. He describes them as places of deep collaboration and negotiation, and it's made me look for ways to apply the logic of pickup basketball courts to everything in life. This is a beautiful book, and I know that he published another book of essays recently, and I'm definitely going to be reading that one next. But the next book on this list, as it should be no surprise to anybody who knows me, is Emily Wilson's new translation of Homer's Iliad. I've been looking forward to this one since her translation of the Odyssey like 7 years ago. Her introduction to the Odyssey was brilliant, and I had really high expectations for her introduction and translation of the Iliad, and it's met them all. It's the best story ever told. Achilles is an endlessly fascinating character. I don't feel like I need to justify this pick. It's the Iliad. And when reading the Iliad, I'm one of those people who typically skips the cataloging of ships at the end of book 2. But in her translator's note, Emily Wilson talks about her decision to use iambic pentameter, and she recommended reading that tedious part out loud in order to hear the rhythm of the language and the pacing of the list. So, like a weirdo, I read it out loud to myself from my Kindle as I was walking to school at dawn one morning when, I hope, nobody was anywhere near listening distance, and I highly recommend doing this. The pace of the language and the pace of walking, it really did add something. All right, I don't need your judgment. If you're looking for something more contemporary and also much funnier, I really liked Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. It follows the story of a woman who has been hired to transcribe the patient meetings of an incompetent sex therapist in a small town. So she walks around hearing and identifying voices of people in the recordings and knows way too much intimate information about them. It's funny at times and dark at other times. The narrator has a lot of antisocial behaviors, but none are treated in a judgmental way. It's about the different ways that people process and respond to grief and anxiety, but it's a fun read that will make you laugh out loud, but it'll also make you feel uncomfortable. It'll do both of those things. Or you can read The Land of Milk and Honey by C. Pam Zhang. I loved her debut novel, How Much of These Hills is Gold, which played with and disrupted all the tropes of the American Western. This one is climate fiction dystopia. It follows the story of a woman who becomes the head chef to a billionaire who owns the rights to one of the last places on Earth that can grow real food. She has a complicated relationship with the employer's daughter, a scientist trying to revive extinct species and save humanity through geoengineering. It's a beautifully written, interesting story about our hunger for food, power, love, and all the good stuff. It's an engaging story with little bits of prose that read like poetry, and this one I feel like I need to quote from in order to give you a sense of it, how she blends descriptions of food with larger themes of memory and power. At one point, while she's living the privileged life of the chef on this compound, she reflects on a summer in her recent past when she lived in that dystopian world where nothing grew. She says, "I can see now that I was hungry for love that summer, for something to love. A bite, a dream, a person, a meal, a field, a piece of a world worth believing in. Not for me the solace of beef bourguignon. Not for me red wine and browned butter, that unctuousness proximate to rot or burning that stickied a diner's tongue. I had lived too long in the low country. I had tasted bitter gray. Only ashes and lost empires in the crust of a Queen Amman that would never shatter the same way again." I mean, that's good, right? Anyway, it's a great book if you like world-class descriptions of food along with some climate change disaster fiction. And honestly, who doesn't want both of those things from fiction in 2023? And finally, if you want a great holiday read, I really enjoyed Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. It's a story of a writer for a weekly live comedy sketch show who becomes romantically involved with a musical guest from that show. On the surface, it's a fun romantic comedy that is, at times, legitimately funny. The protagonist is a comedy writer, but it's also more than that. The novel keeps a consistent focus on the relationship between the authentic self and the performance of the self. It's a really fun and thoughtful novel, and I have many, many more thoughts on this one. I even have an entire podcast episode on it on Literary Connections, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. I also have a few books that I read that were published in 2022 that definitely would have made 2022's list if I had read them on time. Trust by Hernan Diaz deserves 100% of the praise that it got last year. It is a truly original novel about the ways that money and storytelling shape reality. Rabbit Hutch by Tess Genty will be rattling around in my head for a very, very long time. It's about how a human life is shaped and traumatized by the expectations of others and the entitlements that people feel they have over other people's bodies and attention. Additionally, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver is brilliant. It's a Dickensian exploration of poverty and the opioid crisis. Again, 100% deserving of all the praise that it got last year. It's a heartbreaking story. And if you're here because you were hoping that I'd recommend some art books, then All the Beauty in the World by Patrick Bringley is a lovely memoir of a man who worked as a guard in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I'd also recommend Bosch and Bruegel by Joseph Leo Kerner. But my obsession with Bruegel here is well documented, so that should be no surprise. And that's all for this year. I'll be back with more art and art theory videos in 2024, and possibly the occasional poetry content. Thanks for staying with me this year.